My mother made the announcement while she was spooning green beans onto my father's plate. That was her style. If something was meant to wound you, she liked to wrap it in ordinary motions. A dish passed, a napkin folded, a sentence dropped like it belonged there. "We've decided the house will go to Daniel," she said. "It just makes the most sense." The room went quiet in that fake family way. Not silent, just careful. My brother leaned back in his chair like he had been waiting for that line all evening. His smile was small, but it was there. His wife stared at her water glass. My father kept his eyes on his dinner. I set my fork down. The house wasn't just a house. It was the only thing my parents owned outright. A brick two-story in a suburb outside Columbus. 3 bedrooms. Wide front porch. The same place where my mother used to line up school pictures in the hallway and tell guests Daniel had always been the natural leader in the family. It had doubled in value over the past decade. It was also the thing my parents had always used as proof that, no matter what happened, they would be fine. And now, apparently, it was my brother's. "Why?" I asked. My mother dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Because he'll handle things when we're older. He has a family. He understands responsibility." I almost laughed at that. Daniel was 36. He had started 2 businesses in 5 years and finished none of them. He was always between opportunities. Always one lucky break away from becoming exactly who my parents had spent his whole life saying he was. I was 33, a compliance analyst at a regional bank. I paid attention for a living. Patterns, missing numbers, clean stories that turned dirty when you checked the dates. None of that had ever impressed my mother. To her, Daniel had charisma. I had paperwork. So, I nodded once and said, "Okay," that was all. My brother actually looked relieved. He thought I was backing down. My mother took my silence as consent. Even my father exhaled a little, like a storm had passed. But something in that room was wrong. Not unfair, wrong. There's a difference. And once you learn it, you can feel it in your body before you can prove it on paper. On the drive home, my husband didn't turn the radio on. He knows me well enough to leave space when I need it. After 10 minutes, I said, "They're hiding something." He glanced over. "You mean the transfer?" "I mean, whatever happened before the transfer." He waited. "I've watched people lie about money for 11 years, I said. The ones who feel justified are always the calmest. That got his attention. When we got home, I changed out of my sweater, tied my hair up, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county recorder site. A lot of people think truth arrives like thunder. It doesn't. Most of the time it arrives as a line item. My parents' property records came up first. Same parcel number, same tax history, same legal description. Then I saw a filing from 4 months earlier. A durable financial power of attorney. My mother had signed one. My father had signed one too. Agent. Daniel Mercer. I sat back slowly. That alone was not illegal. Elderly parents give adult children power of attorney all the time. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's practical. Sometimes it's how the theft begins. I kept digging. There had also been a recent request to change the mailing address for the property tax statements. Not to my parents' home, to a private mailbox service 15 minutes away. I stared at the screen long enough for it to go dark. Then I clicked it awake and kept going. By midnight, I had 3 printed pages on my desk and one question growing louder in my head. Why would my parents need Daniel controlling their finances before they ever told me the house was going to him? That was the first thing. The second came the next morning. My Aunt Linda called before 9. I hadn't told her anything yet, but my mother never kept good news to herself when it involved me losing something, so of course Linda had already heard. "She actually announced it at dinner?" she asked. She did. Linda made a sound that meant, "Your mother is still your mother." Then she lowered her voice. "Your father asked me last month whether tax bills could go into collections without him knowing." I stopped writing. "What exactly did he say?" "He said Daniel was handling everything now, and he didn't want to bother anyone if it was normal." "Did he look confused?" "He looked embarrassed," she said. "There's a difference." "Yes, there is." I thanked her, hung up, and called in sick to work for the first time in almost 2 years. By noon, I had enough to know I wasn't dealing with a bad family decision. I was dealing with a setup, and I still didn't know how deep it went. If you've never looked closely at financial abuse, it rarely starts with one giant move. It starts with permission, a son offering to help out, a daughter being told not to worry, a signature added during a doctor's appointment, a new account just for convenience, a parent too tired to ask one more question. What makes it so effective is that it borrows the language of care. Daniel had always been good at that. He knew exactly how to sound useful while moving himself into the center of everything. I requested what I legally could and pulled what was publicly available. The rest came from small things. Fragments. Patterns. People saying more than they meant to. My father's pharmacy account had been switched to autopay from a different checking account than usual. My aunt knew because she'd picked up one of his prescriptions and noticed the card on file wasn't the old one. My mother had complained to her neighbor 2 weeks earlier that the pension money never seemed to stretch anymore, which was a strange problem for two people with no mortgage, modest habits, and grown children. Then there was Daniel's sudden improvement in lifestyle. Not dramatic. That would have been too obvious, but enough. A new SUV he called a lease special. A golf membership he claimed came through a friend. A weekend trip to Scottsdale with pictures carefully framed to avoid showing where he was actually staying. People like Daniel never understand that what gives them away is not the spending. It's the timing. 3 days later, I met a former coworker for coffee. She now worked in elder fraud investigations for the county. I didn't give her names at first. I laid out the structure. Adult son, aging parents, new power of attorney, house transfer being framed as estate planning, possible address change, possible account control, possible pressure. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Do you think they know what they signed?" I thought about my father staring at his plate, my mother speaking too brightly. The way Daniel had not looked surprised when she announced it, only satisfied. "I think my mother knows less than she thinks she does," I said. "And I think my father knows enough to be ashamed." She nodded slowly. "That's usually how it looks in the middle," she said. "Pull the bank trail if you can. Also check if there were any contractor liens, private notes, or insurance changes. Sometimes the house is not the first asset they touch. It's just the cleanest one to present as a family decision." So I did. By Friday, the shape of it started to emerge. There was no contractor lien. There was something worse. Daniel had opened an LLC 13 months earlier. Mercer Residential Solutions. The name was almost funny. It sounded like something printed on a magnetic truck sign. There was no office, no web presence, no public business activity I could find. But there were references to it in two places that mattered. First, on a scanned insurance adjustment form my aunt somehow got her hands on after my mother left a stack of papers on the dining room sideboard. The home policy contact email had been changed from my father's old AOL address to a business email attached to Mercer Residential Solutions. Second, on a deposit slip image tied to a statement my aunt photographed in terrible lighting from inside her purse while visiting for coffee. A transfer. Monthly. Regular. Not huge. Just steady. The kind of steady that matters. I sat at my kitchen table and reconstructed 6 months of movement from partial records, public filings, statement photos, and date stamps. Every path bent toward Daniel. A utility reimbursement that made no sense. An administrative services payment. A recurring transfer from my parents' joint account to Mercer Residential Solutions on the third business day of every month. My mother thought Daniel was helping with bills. Daniel had turned helping with bills into a business model. The part that made my stomach drop came late Friday night. I found a draft quitclaim deed. Not recorded yet. Drafted. Prepared through an online legal form service. Not an attorney. Grantors. My parents. Grantee. Daniel Mercer, a married man, as his sole and separate property. Execution. Date. Blank. Witness line blank. But it existed. The dinner announcement had not been a discussion. It had not even been a warning. It had been stage management. My mother was telling me after the paperwork was already in motion because she believed that once something sounded settled, it became settled. I printed the deed draft and laid it beside the other pages. My husband came into the kitchen around midnight, saw the spread, and didn't ask if I was overreacting. That's one of the reasons I married him. "How bad?" he asked. I looked up at him. "Bad enough that if I stay quiet now, I become part of it." He read my face for a second, then pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "What do you need?" I looked at the papers again. "A clean chain," I said. "Dates. Records. Enough that nobody can call this jealousy." He nodded. Then build it. So I did. Over the next week, I built the file. I didn't write emotional notes in the margins. I didn't circle words in red. I didn't make speeches in my head. I made timelines. I cross-checked signatures. I matched account changes to filing dates. And the deeper I went, the less this looked like a son being favored by his parents, and the more it looked like a man who had mistaken lifelong immunity for intelligence. Still, one thing bothered me. My father. He had signed documents. That much was clear. But every trail I found was routed around him, not through him. That meant Daniel wasn't just using my parents. He was managing what each one was allowed to know, which is when I realized Saturday dinner had not been my opening. It had been Daniel's mistake, because once he believed I had accepted it, he stopped being careful. I called my brother on Tuesday. He answered on the fourth ring, cheerful in the way people are when they think they have the upper hand. Maya, he said. What's up? I need everyone at Mom and Dad's this Saturday. A pause. For what? I found some things I want clarified. He laughed lightly. About the house? About the file. Silence. Just a second. But long enough. Then his voice warmed back up, manufactured and smooth. Sure, if that makes you feel better. That phrase sat in my ear long after the call ended. If that makes you feel better. Like I was emotional. Like he was patient. Like this was still a family disagreement and not a man standing on a trapdoor he didn't know had already opened. The next few days were strangely calm. That happens sometimes before a confrontation that matters. Life keeps moving. Grocery stores stay open. Emails still come in. Someone still has to take the dog out. And, underneath all of it, your body knows something is coming, that your mind has not fully entered yet. On Thursday, my father called me. He almost never called first. Your mother says you're upset, he said. I closed my office door. Are you? A long silence. Then, quietly, I don't know what Daniel has been doing. That was the first honest sentence I'd heard from him in years. I sat down. What do you know? That he said he was helping. His breath caught a little. And that every time I asked a question, your mother told me not to start a fight. There it was. Not villainy, not innocence either. Just weakness dressed up as peace. Dad, I said, do you want me to stop? Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. No. That one word told me everything. He knew enough to be afraid of the truth. He also knew enough to want it anyway. Saturday came cold and colorless. I got there early, carrying a gray accordion file and a legal pad I never ended up using. My mother was in the kitchen already, annoyed before anyone had arrived. This better not be drama, she said without looking at me. I set the file on the table. That depends on what Daniel tells us. She turned then, eyes sharp. Your brother has done more for this family than you think. That was the old script, the one she had been reading from since we were children. Daniel tries. Daniel means well. Daniel is under pressure. Daniel needs support. My father came in from the den and stood by the doorway. He looked tired. More than tired. Stripped down somehow. Like the last few months had been sanding him down and he had run out of strength to pretend otherwise. He looked at the file, then at me, and gave one small nod. That was enough. Daniel arrived 12 minutes late with his wife, Brooke. He came in talking before the door had even closed. So what is this? An intervention? He said, smiling. No one smiled back. Brooke looked around first. She was the only one who noticed the room immediately. I watched her face change before she even sat down. We all took our places around the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had announced the transfer, the same table where Daniel had believed he had already won. I opened the file. Before we talk about the deed, I said, we're going to talk about Mercer Residential Solutions. Daniel didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw did. My mother frowned. What is that? Your son's company, I said. It's consulting, Daniel said quickly. I told them about that. I slid the incorporation printout across the table. Then, let's be exact. I put down the next page. Registered 13 months ago. The next, property insurance contact changed to this company email. The next, monthly transfers from Mom and Dad's account to this company beginning the same month. Daniel leaned back. This is ridiculous. Those were reimbursements. For what? He shrugged. Managing things, bills, repairs, time. I looked at him for a long second. You charged your retired parents a management fee to control their own money? Brooke turned and looked at him. That was the first crack. Daniel saw it too, so he shifted. You don't understand what was happening. Dad was overwhelmed. Mom needed help. I'm sure they did, I said. That doesn't explain the private mailbox, or the draft quitclaim deed, or why the tax correspondence was redirected before they told anyone the house was being transferred. My mother turned sharply. Redirected? I slid that page toward her. She read it once, then again. I didn't know about this, she said. Daniel's voice hardened. Because it was administrative. No, I said. Because you didn't want paperwork coming to the house where both of them could see it. Maya, my mother snapped. Stop talking to him like he's a criminal. No one said anything for a beat. Then my father did. Maybe let her finish. That changed the room more than anything I had put on the table. Daniel looked at him. Actually looked at him. Maybe for the first time in years as a person with authority instead of a man he could walk around. I opened the second section of the file, and that was when Daniel stopped smirking. I laid out the timeline 1 page at a time. No speeches, no raised voice, just sequence. Power of attorney executed. Mailing address changed. Insurance contact rerouted. LLC formed. Monthly transfers begin. Online deed prepared. My parents watched their own life arranged in paper. It is a strange thing, watching people meet the written version of what they allowed to happen. My mother kept picking up each page as if maybe it would say something different the second time. It never did. Daniel tried 3 defenses in the first 5 minutes. First, confusion. This is being taken out of context. Then expertise. It's more complicated than it looks. Then, injury. You've always wanted to make me look bad. That last one would have worked on my mother a year earlier. Maybe 6 months earlier. Not now. Not with dates in front of her. Not with my father sitting still and staring at the transfer records like he was looking at the ruins of his own judgment. Brooke was crying quietly by then. Not dramatic crying. Just the kind a person does when their world starts rearranging itself without their permission. I put down the last packet. Here's the draft deed, I said, prepared to transfer the house entirely into Daniel's name. Sole property. Not a trust. Not joint management. Not protection planning. Ownership. My mother's lips parted. She looked at Daniel. You said it was so the house would be easier to handle if one of us got sick. It is, he said too fast. No, I said. It makes the house easier for you to borrow against, sell, or leverage without waiting for probate. That's what it does. He slammed his palm on the table. You don't know everything. I looked right at him. I know enough. He stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. This is unbelievable. I've been carrying them for months. With what money? I asked. Theirs? He pointed at me. There it is. That tone. That superior little tone. This is why no one wants to tell you anything. You turn everything into a case. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, You made it a case. The room went very still. And then my father spoke. How much? His voice was flat. Empty. Almost. I turned to him. I can document just over 40,000 in redirected transfers and unauthorized account control with what I have here. It may be more if a full subpoena review is done. My mother made a sound like air leaving something torn. Daniel looked at her immediately, not with guilt, but with panic. That told me more than any spreadsheet. He still believed this could be managed if he could control the right reaction. He moved toward my mother. Mom, listen to me. She's making this sound worse than it is. My father stood. It took effort. You could see it. But he stood. Don't, he said. Daniel stopped. I had not heard my father use that voice since I was 16, and Daniel came home drunk after taking my mother's car. Back then, my father had grounded him for a week. My mother had shortened it to 2 days. That was the family in one memory. Now here we were again, only older, and the stakes had teeth. My father put one hand on the back of his chair. Did you move our money? Daniel looked at him. Did you? My father repeated. I was going to fix it. That was the wrong answer. Not because it was the worst one, because it was the first honest one. My mother sat down hard in her chair. Her face had gone pale in a way I had never seen before. Not angry, not defensive, exposed. When? She whispered. When were you going to fix it? Daniel didn't answer. Brooke did. She turned to him. crying openly now. Is that why you kept saying the cash flow would settle? Is that why you didn't want me asking about the account? He looked at her with pure irritation. In that moment, whatever version of him she had loved disappeared. I picked up my phone and placed it beside the file. I have already spoken to an attorney, I said, and to Adult Protective Services. After this meeting, I'm giving Dad the contact information and the full file. He can decide the next step, but I am not covering this up. Daniel stared at me like he still couldn't believe I had done all this quietly. That was always his mistake. People like him think power is noise. They never notice what patience can build. You'd destroy your own family over paperwork? He said. I almost answered. But my father got there first. No, he said. You did. Daniel looked at him, stunned. My father's eyes were wet, but his voice did not shake. I kept telling myself you meant well. I kept telling myself your mother understood the details. I kept telling myself I was tired, and all that meant was you kept going. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. No one moved. Daniel grabbed his keys from the counter. Brooke stood too, but not to follow him, just to get away from the table, away from him, away from the exact second her life split into before and after. At the doorway, Daniel turned back to me. You've wanted this your whole life. I knew what he meant. Not the money, not the house. The moment he fell, no, I said. I wanted you to stop before it got this far. He left without another word. The front door shut so hard one of my mother's framed recipe prints rattled against the wall. Then nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, my father sat back down. He looked at the file. Then at me. What do we do now? That was the real payoff. Not his collapse. Not my mother's silence. That question. For the first time in my life, when it mattered most, they were asking me. The next month was ugly. Real life usually is. There was no clean final scene. No perfect apology. No single phone call where everyone said the exact thing they should have said years earlier. There were forms, meetings, affidavits, account reviews, a freeze request, a contested power of attorney, a formal complaint, a lawyer my parents should have hired before they ever let Daniel help. The draft deed was never signed. The power of attorney was revoked. The mailbox service was closed. The account transfers were traced farther than I could on my own once investigators got involved. Some of the money was recoverable. Some wasn't. Daniel was not arrested in handcuffs on the front lawn in some satisfying movie ending. He was investigated. He was sued. He was forced into a version of consequence that lasts longer than one dramatic moment. His wife left him within 3 weeks. My mother did not talk about that. She also did not defend him again in front of me. That may not sound like much. In my family, it was seismic. The house stayed in my parents' names. A proper estate plan was drafted after that. Not to reward me, not to punish him. Just to put walls where walls should have been all along. Clear instructions, independent review. No secret authority. No unsigned favors disguised as love. My father started calling on Tuesdays. At first, he talked only about practical things. The furnace, the gutters, the insurance renewal. The tomatoes in the backyard not doing well this year. Men like my father can spend a lifetime using logistics to avoid grief. But logistics are still a kind of reaching, and I took what he gave me. One Tuesday, he said, I should have listened to you a long time ago. I stood at my kitchen sink with the phone pressed to my ear and looked out at the bare trees in our yard. I didn't rescue him from the sentence. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. But I said, I know. And for us, that was more honest than forgiveness pretending to be healing. My mother took longer. She never gave me the speech people imagine in stories like this. No tears, no grand confession, no full inventory of every way she had made my brother the center of gravity and expected me to orbit around him politely. What I got instead was smaller. One afternoon, I stopped by to drop off copies of revised trust documents. She was in the hallway with an old photo box open on the floor. She didn't realize I was there at first. In her hand was a newspaper clipping from when I passed the CPA exam at 24. A tiny local notice my father had cut out and saved. She looked up and saw me. Then she set it down carefully and said, I didn't know you kept working nights that whole year. It was such a strange sentence. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong. Just the first true recognition of labor she had never bothered to see while I was doing it. I did, I said. She nodded once. You must have been tired. I could have said a lot in that moment. Yes, I was. I was tired for years. I was tired when you praised him for trying and expected me to survive quietly. I was tired when you called my work details. I was tired when you trusted his confidence more than my competence. Instead, I said, I was. She looked back at the clipping. That was all. And somehow, because it was real, it mattered more than a perfect speech would have. As for Daniel, I stopped tracking every development once the legal process was fully underway. Not because it didn't matter, because I had already spent enough of my life organizing myself around the damage he caused. There's a point where justice stops being about watching the other person fall and starts being about refusing to fall with them. That point came later for me than I wish it had, but it came. A few months after everything broke open, my husband and I had dinner with friends. Nothing special. Pasta, cheap wine, too much laughter over something small. I remember standing in our kitchen afterward, loading plates into the dishwasher, and realizing my chest felt different. Lighter, yes, but not because I had won. Because I no longer needed my family to tell me who I was. That had always been the deepest theft waiting under all the financial ones. Not the house. Not the money. The position. The script. The role of dependable daughter who would absorb the insult, fix the mess, and ask for nothing in return. I still help my parents. I probably always will in some form. But help with boundaries feels very different from sacrifice without them. That is the part people don't talk about enough. You can love people and still lock the file cabinet. You can answer the phone and still refuse access. You can rebuild something without restoring the old lie. My parents still live in that house. The porch light still leans slightly to the left. The hallway still smells faintly like cedar in winter. The kitchen is still too yellow because my mother once insisted that warm rooms made people kinder. Maybe she was wrong about a lot. Maybe not about that. The last time I was there, my father handed me a spare key, not because I asked, not because there was an emergency, just because. My mother watched from the doorway and didn't object. I slipped it into my coat pocket and felt its weight there all the way home. For most of my life, I thought peace would look like being chosen. It didn't. It looked like the truth, finally put in order. And this time, I kept the file.